for methods of depreciation, there are several methods, but in this class we discussed two methods. And for the FE exam, that's the two methods cover in your fundamental of engineering exam. And I will show the reference for the FE in a minute. But let's talk about the method, the two methods that we are discussing here. The first one is a straight line method. Straight line method, SL. And for the straight line method, we have the depreciation at year J is equal to the initial cost of the access minus the service value divided the number of years that we use to depreciate. So with that, let's define DJ. That is depreciation amount. At year J. And then we have C is the initial cost of an access. We have SN, a service value, something that we discussed in the previous lesson, service value, the remaining value after when we want to dispose the equipment, and also known as SV, service values. And N is the number of years of depreciation, number of years that that we use to depreciate the access, and it depends on the equipment and depends on how IIS allow for that equipment. For example, if we use computer, laptop, it can last for several years, so the depreciation can be 3 years. If we buy a longer lasting equipment like a pickup truck or excavator, you can depreciate it over 5-7 years, etc. So that is N. The next method we use is, we call it modified accelerated cost recovery system. And that we call it a MAX, modified attractive cost recovery system. And the equation to determine the depreciation amount is equal to a factor time the initial cost. And I'm going to define what is factor. Factor here, we can use the table in FE reference. And as I mentioned, the our exam 2 reference, we also use FE reference, so that more specific, that is page 2 in our exam 2 reference. And let me show that in the reference here. Our FE reference, go to page number 2, just are the two methods we have for depreciation. And if you go to the bottom of page number 2, that is the table used to determine the factor for the modified accelerated cost recovery system, MAX, and depends on recovery period or the years of depreciation. For example, if it's 3 years, then you have the first year 33.3%. That is the factor in that equation. Year number 2, 44.5%. And you may wonder what the recovery period is 3 years. However, the year that you have in the equation is 3 years, then you have the first year, the second year, the third year, and fourth year. 7.4%. Why the recovery period only 3 years? Why is that? It basically go back to the half-year convention that we discussed earlier in this class, the first lesson video. Half-year convention, and that assumed the assets are placed in service or disposed in the mid-year. So regardless of if you buy that equipment in January or December, assume that in somewhere mid-year, June or July. Similarly, if you dispose that equipment in January or December, we consider that in mid-year. So the first year and the last year, if, for example, the recovery period is 3 years, then the first year and the last year, it means year 4, it only consider that in the half year of that. So when you add them, the first half year, year number 2, year number 3, 4 years, and year number 4 half year, that become 3 years. And similar apply for other recovery period, 5 years, 10 years, or 7 years. So go back to here, that's what you have for the factor in that equation. And one thing that you can see in the MAX, Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System, the service value is not considered. So we have that in the service value is, in this case, as you can see, Sn is not considered. It considered in straight line method, but not the modified accelerated cost recovery system. And when you have depreciated after several years, we can determine the book value. What is the value left after we depreciated certain years? So that is the book value. Last one, and apply for any method. We have book value at year J. And book value of year J, we call that BVJ, book value at year J. How to determine that? It equal to the initial cost minus sum of all the depreciation in from year 1 to year J. So I from 1 to J. So that is the equation to determine the book value. What is the left after we depreciate it? Make sense? So that is book value. And that equation also available on the FE reference, as you can see there, book value. So go back here. And the last thing is we discuss is the declare initial cost of an access before we move on to problem 1. First, the initial cost. See, in those equations that we're talking about for the method of depreciation, must be acceptable in terms of the IIS definition. So for example, if we have we buy a scraper as shown in the figure, 150,000. The tie-on scraper costs 10,000. Then the tires are considered the current period expense and are not depreciable. Why is that? And you can see scraper can last for 5, 7, 10 years, but not the tire. So the scraper itself can be depreciated over that 5, 7 years period. But the tire, if you drive your car can last 10, 15 years, but the tire, a few years we have to replace, depends on how much we drive. But bottom line, it cannot last at the same time as the car, similar to here. So that tire cost should be deducted from the amount that you use at the initial cost for the depreciation. So when you deduct that, for example, in this case, 10,000 for tire, you can use that 10,000 at the operating cost of the current year, the year you buy that equipment, not over a period of year that you depreciate it. And that is the difference between the two costs. And that we applied in problem 1 in the next lesson video.